This is the Sony A7IV, my most used and frankly, best all-around camera that I've ever owned. But this is the Sony A7RV, an improvement in just about every area, almost double the resolution, 8K video, AI processing, all that kind of stuff. But is it worth the extra $1,400 over the A7IV? Let's find out. Now, as always, for some context and disclosure, none of this stuff was given to me by Sony. I own this A7IV, but the A7R5 as well as this 50 1.2 GM are on loan from Sony, and I'm literally sending them back as soon as I get done with this video. So sad day for me, but at least you know kind of where I'm coming from. Now we'll go over the specs really quick because that stuff honestly is really important, and then we'll talk about how all that stuff works in practice. So both of these are full frame cameras. The A7IV has a 33 megapixel sensor, where the A7R5 inherits the same sensor from the A7R4 at 61 megapixels. Now, the best thing and the most useful thing for me would be in this camera that, yes, you can shoot in APS-C crop mode, but you're gonna get less than 20 megapixel photos out of the A7IV, but you can shoot in crop mode and get a pretty high resolution file out of the A7R5. You can also shoot all of your full frame stuff in lower megapixel counts. So I believe the medium raw file out of the A7R5 is about like a 26 megapixel, so about 800 or so less than the A7IV. But for wedding stuff, I feel like that would be incredibly beneficial, especially with the 3 different dials here. As a wedding photographer, the first mode would be great for portraits and key moments during a wedding, like the end of a ceremony or a first look, something like that. And then the second thing is what I would probably sit on most of a day at 26 megapixels, giving me great resolution, but also saving space on cards. Honestly, all those in-between moments aren't things that a client's ever probably gonna blow up really, really large. And even if they did, 26 megapixels is great. And the third mode, honestly, I probably would use the 15 megapixel mode for all the party dancing stuff at weddings, where it's just all about all those crazy candid moments where people are dancing and stuff, and you don't need high resolution of that at all. So both the features of this camera as well as the ability to move in within those would be super beneficial for me. And I have done that on the A7IV, where I've punched into the Super 35 mode to get a little bit more reach for ceremonies and stuff. And honestly, that is totally fine, but it would be nice to have a little bit more resolution doing that on the A7R5. Now, both of these cameras actually share the same Bion Z XR processor between the two, so a lot of that processing power is going to be the same. But the A7R5 obviously has that new AI processor. So I think one of the things that is getting overlooked in all of this stuff is that the A7R5 isn't exactly going to be faster necessarily, but it's just going to be smarter in the autofocus because it's having an entire extra processor looking and kind of figuring out all of those different little algorithms. For me, as someone who mostly takes photos of people, the nice thing is the A7IV can track faces and eyes and just whatever you tell it to track the way that I use it. But the A7R5 is a little bit more intelligent, obviously has that processor, and is able to track, let's see, face, eyes, head, and body. It has pose estimation, all that kind of stuff. And I can definitely tell that it is a little bit smarter in those areas, especially when people are a little bit further away. And especially if they turn around, you can have that kind of estimation on the A7R5, which you don't get on the A7IV. That being said, honestly, the A7IV has been totally fine for me, especially in photo mode. I feel like I see this more being beneficial in video mode, but that is going to be just another topic, I guess. They both have in-body image stabilization. The A7IV gets 5.5 stops, where the A7R5 actually gets 8 stops. I wouldn't say that I have seen like a 2.5 stop difference necessarily, but I can tell that the A7R5 is a little bit better, a little bit easier. And those times where I'm at a wedding reception, I want to run out and grab a photo of, let's say, the venue or something, having the ability to get that a little bit extra might be the difference between me needing to grab a tripod or not. So those are definitely something that would be beneficial for me. Now, in terms of just general ergonomics, they are very, very similar in terms of button layout. The only major difference in terms of the buttons, honestly, is that the A7R5 has a button that you have to press down on this selection dial here, where the A7 IV does not. And frankly, I prefer not to have that, or to have the button that you have on these back ones where you can click it in and lock it, or click it out and just have it roam free. So I do find that having to press the button down to move it from manual to, say, the custom modes or something is annoying, because I don't find that this is very easy to move in the first place. So it's one of those things that doesn't really matter, but it is a little bit of a bummer because I do prefer not having to deal with that. Now, maybe the biggest thing for me, just from a usability standpoint, is definitely going to be the articulating screen and the EVF. The screen on the A7 IV is that just typical flip screen thing here, where on the A7R5 you have the flip screen, but you also have the tilt screen. And on the A7R5, basically in any mode where I am using the camera as its main operator and not just using it like on a tripod to film myself, I prefer having the tilt screen for sure. Having the LCD screen being mostly aligned with the sensor and the lens is just so much easier, and honestly more inconspicuous even. Just being able to kind of flip this up and kind of just hold it down here and hit some buttons, it almost looks like you're just looking through a menu, where if you have this out, it's just another thing that is going to be a little bit distracting, which isn't the end of the world for sure, but it is a slight annoyance. Now the LCD on here is a 3.2, where we have a 3-inch here, so not a huge difference, but the resolution has doubled from just over 1 million dots to over 2 million dots. And so you can definitely see the resolution there, which is a huge plus. Honestly, the main thing, even more so than the back LCD screen, is the EVF here. You have a major jump in both size and resolution between the A7 IV and the A7R5. Now we're getting into small areas here, but viewfinders are small. So on the A7 IV, you have a 1/2-inch display that is 3.69 million dots, while on the A7R5, you have a 0.64-inch display, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it's definitely noticeable when you bring the camera up to your eye. And then you have a 9.44 million dot display, so you're almost triple the resolution of the A7 IV display. And it's one of those things that is definitely noticeable in use for sure. Now, if you half press the shutter or are focusing, the resolution drops significantly. I will definitely say that. But if you aren't just constantly focusing and doing that kind of stuff, the viewfinder here is just so much nicer to use. It's bigger in your frame, all that kind of stuff. So while it might not seem like that big a difference, in practice, just the general feel of using the camera is a lot better on the A7R5 versus the A7 IV. So let's jump into some files, both photo and video, kind of see the differences in practice, and then I'll give you my final thoughts.
All right, so we're going to start off with kind of a boring test here just to show the dynamic range as well as the resolution of these camera sensors. On the left here, we have the A7R5, and on the right, we have the A7 IV. Obviously, you can see a huge difference in resolution, but otherwise, as we kind of pop through here, it's pretty fascinating how close they are in terms of color, as well as just general dynamic range. It's an outdoor environment, so it's slightly different. But you can see as we kind of go up here, the clouds start popping in a little bit more. You get a little bit here, a little bit here. And as we're at, I think, 3 stops underexposed here, you're starting to get a lot more of the detail in the sky. Here's all the way at 4 stops underexposed. You're obviously going to get a lot of grain. This is with no sort of processing on that. All the same settings otherwise. I would also say that if you looked especially at the fence here, you can see that the A7R5 is slightly more green. It's slightly warmer, slightly greener. But in terms of the other color, otherwise, I didn't really notice that big of a difference. All right, so here's one from New York when I was trying to kind of check how things are going in really high ISO performance here. You could see that, the A7 IV looks a lot better, but it kind of just evens out once you get into a similar resolution. Once you're backing off here, they look pretty similar. There's a little bit of stuff going on up here, but if you bring the A7R5 back to a similar resolution, they're pretty similar. But overall, in terms of color and everything, I think having both of these cameras together you're not seeing a huge difference in color difference whatsoever. So I would not be concerned with shooting both of these cameras at a similar gig. And in terms of dynamic range here, we can see that the sky is obviously a little bit blown out, but you're getting pretty much the same amount of information out of both. Like they look very, very, very similar, which I guess shows the dating of the A7R5 sensor, considering it's the same sensor as the A7R4, but also just how good the A7IV sensor is for kind of like an entry level, I guess, prosumer style camera. Here is the only spot where I really went, I guess maybe. So if you're looking in here, again, these are the exact same settings, both at f2.8. There's like slightly more dynamic range coming through right here versus on the A7IV. But I mean, you're kind of hard pressed to see any real difference. I guess you can really see it here though, where you're getting a little bit more dynamic range on the A7R5 versus the A7IV here. So a few more boring real world comparisons here. I'm just syncing settings here to make everything look the same. It all just looks pretty similar, like a very small tint difference. But overall, you're mostly going to see it in the resolution. Everything else from my point of view here is just pretty darn similar. I think the A7IV has like ever so slightly better low light performance, and the A7R5 has ever so slightly better dynamic range. I don't know if those are the stats that are being put out there, but at least that's what in practice for me I'm seeing in terms of, you know, looking at my files. I mean, another difference here on my M1 Max MacBook Pro, you could see that these previews load a lot faster on the A7IV than the A7R5 just because you have so much more detail. Now here is where I'd be looking more at something at like 12,800. For me as a wedding photographer, this is the time where I'm fine with shooting some black and white stuff if need be. But for me, this amount of noise in especially a black and white is an acceptable amount of noise for me. I wish it was cleaner, but hey, it definitely will work for my needs in such a low light environment.
So overall, both cameras are fantastic. And to be honest, if I'm only basing it off of image quality and the end results, I don't think it would be worth it for me to upgrade to the A7R5 over the A7 IV. But all those little things definitely add up between having those extra resolutions, being able to punch in at a Super 35 crop and still have a lot of resolution. But honestly, the biggest thing of all those is just going to be the experience of using the camera with the new EVF and the new LCD screen. I wouldn't say for me that just alone the EVF and LCD are worth the $1,400 price difference between $2,500 and $3,900. But if Sony did somehow come out with like an A7IV or something that inherited the viewfinder and the LCD for, let's say, even $400 or $500, I probably would jump on that deal to have the experience be better, because all of the resolutions and output and everything out of the A7 IV are fantastic, but the usability and the experience could be a lot better, and having those things would definitely be worth it to me. Now, I wish I had a conclusion, but kind of here is where I'm sitting. I'm definitely considering picking up another photo hybrid body on the Sony system, as my current cameras are the A7 IV and the FX3. The FX3 being simply a video camera. So I'd like to have the option to dual wield photo setups as my lens collection grows. So I'm probably not going to sell my A7 IV and buy a pair of A7R5s, but for how similar they are in some ways, I think pairing these two could be a really cool option. So I'm definitely considering picking one up, get kind of the best of both worlds. To be honest, I'm not sure exactly what I'm gonna do here, but I do love that I have those options. So maybe subscribe to see what I end up with. So thanks everyone for watching. Thanks again to Sony for sending this over for me to check out again. It's definitely given me a lot to think about, and my wallet something to think about as well. If you're interested in more, my first look video on this can be found here. My A7 IV video can be found here, and I will see you all on the next one.